As far as I can tell, Egypt's re-revolution is going to fail. And in today's headline story, I'm going to tell you why. Hey everyone, welcome back to AMTV News. I'm Topher Morrison. This is your daily, high-octane, full-spectrum news blitz. In our first story in law news, Obamacare's employer mandate delayed until 2015. Under the provision, companies with 50 or more workers face a fine of as much as $3,000 per employee if they don't offer affordable health insurance. Ezra Klein of the Washington Post calls it a congressional end-around. After all, they intended it to go into effect before the 2014 midterm elections. Ben Dominic of the Heartland Institute quipped, quote, "Little known fact, the Constitution made Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy the fourth branch of government." What the delay, or really what should be reported as selective enforcement, illustrates is the power of the executive to pick and choose what laws to enforce and who to target. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? To say nothing of the fact, writes Mike Adams of Infowars.com, that Obamacare will punish healthy eaters and subsidize risky lifestyles. In our next story in entertainment news, Steven Spielberg is to produce the next Grapes of Wrath adaptation. An iconic story by John Steinbeck set during the Great Depression introduced to America the defiant and tragic protagonist Tom Joad, who has been an enduring symbol for social reform, notes Deadline Hollywood. A story still reverberating nearly 75 years later in the hearts and minds of those affected by the 2008 crash, who also suffered the wrath of a private central bank and its artificial and unstable credit market-driven boom, which consolidated the wealth of the country into the hands of a few elite. Steinbeck once wrote, quote, "I want to put a tag of shame on the greedy bastards who are responsible for this. I've done my damnedest to rip a reader's nerves to rags." The question is, will Americans understand social reform hasn't changed a thing? In history news, on this day in 1988, Iran Air Flight 655 was shot down by the USS Vincennes, killing 290 innocent civilians from 6 nations, including 66 children, notes Shapur Qasemi, writing for Global Research. The long and short, the Airbus A300 B2 left Iran, was initially classified as civilian by the Vincennes, stationed in the Persian Gulf during the Iran-Iraq War, enforcing the U.S. embargo on Iran. The Vincennes officers falsely identified it as a threatening Iranian Air Force F-14A Tomcat, falsely identified it on an attack pattern, and shot it down by Aegis missiles at over 13,000 feet, although the USS Snides nearby identified it as a non-hostile flight. The flight for 655 was clearly listed. A ComAir or commercial aircraft warning was acknowledged by the CEO on the Vincennes. Both were evidently ignored. The U.S. has to date not apologized. Another must-read story amidst the fog of war. In our next story in environment news, deserts are greening across the globe. That's right. According to Australia's National Science Agency, CO2 fertilization correlated with 11% increase in foliage cover from 1982 to 2010 across parts of the arid areas of the world. The fertilization effect occurs where elevated CO2 enables a leaf during photosynthesis, the process by which green plants convert sunlight into sugar to extract more carbon from the air or lose less water to the air, or both, reports phys.org. Scientists debate whether it's good or bad, but the consensus remains while the climate is obviously changing, it's been doing that for at least 65 billion years. According to the Earth, not all that different than once before. And in our final story today in geopolitical news, the Egyptian re-revolution to fail. It took the British Isles hundreds of years to extricate itself from religious and political paranoia. It took until they were knee-deep in their countrymen's blood to emancipate themselves from monarchical rule and realize the promise of the Magna Carta signed over 400 years earlier. What's my point? Egypt has a long-ass road ahead of them, full of nasty characters, meddlesome special interests, and frankly, themselves. According to Pew, 95% of Egyptians think it's good that Islam plays a large role in politics. 55% identify with fundamentalists. 54% believe in gender segregation, 82% believe in stoning adulterers, which essentially just means women, and 84%, according to this 2010 Pew poll, believe in the death penalty for those who leave Islam. Perhaps a long road ahead is an understatement, and as much as Americans love to blame their problems on the U.S. government, perhaps it's time to stop giving Egypt the same excuse. Capturing every corner of the alternative media, watch AMTV News Monday through Friday. Got a tip or an interesting news clip? Shoot me an email at tophermorrison@amtvmedia.com. Follow me on Twitter at AMTV News and like me on Facebook at The Real Topher Morrison. Find my source material and more videos like these at AMTV Media and greenwave.com. Both are part of the AMTV network. This is AMTV News, the voice of independence.